Tonight, we're stepping through a door that most history books are afraid to open all the way. We're going to talk about what it was genuinely, honestly, uncomfortably like to live in London in the 1700s. Not the version with heroic naval officers and witty drawing room conversations, but the real thing. The mud, the smell, the noise, the fear, the extraordinary, dazzling, sometimes horrifying spectacle of the largest city in the Western world. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy history told the way it actually was, without the romanticism, without the polish, but with all the texture and detail that makes the past feel real. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, and whether you've ever visited London yourself. It's always wonderful to hear from the people who join us from every corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because we're about to walk the streets of a city that would shock you, fascinate you, and probably make you very grateful for indoor plumbing. It is 6 o'clock in the morning. The year is 1720. The city of London is stirring. You open your eyes to darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of a modern bedroom with soft lamplight bleeding under the door, but a cold, thick darkness broken only by the faint orange smear of a tallow candle guttering on the windowsill. The smell reaches you before anything else does, and that smell is something modern language can barely do justice to. Coal smoke, unwashed wool, the sour tang of a chamber pot that hasn't been emptied yet. And beneath all of it, drifting up to the floorboards and in through the cracked window frame, the unmistakable, ever-present, deeply insistent smell of a city that has not yet learned what a sewer system is for. Welcome to London. Outside your window, the city is already moving. The street below is alive with a noise you would find overwhelming even before breakfast. The rhythmic clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, the protesting squeal of iron wheel rims grinding over uneven paving, the hollow drumbeat of horse hooves, and cutting through all of it, the human voices. Street vendors calling their wares in voices trained to carry over the din of 600,000 other people. Milk below, fresh milk, hot cross buns, buy my chairs to mend, knives to grind. Old rags, any old rags. Each trade had its own cry, its own particular cadence, and together they formed a kind of rough urban symphony that played from before dawn until long after dark. London in 1720 is by almost any measure the most extraordinary city on earth. It is home to somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000 people, a number so large it strains the imagination of anyone living anywhere else in Britain, where most towns count their residents in the hundreds rather than the hundreds of thousands. Nearly 1 in 10 people in England lives here. The city sprawls across the north bank of the Thames in a great, irregular mass of streets and lanes and courts and alleys, spilling across the river over the single ancient stone bridge that has connected the two halves of the city for centuries. It is a place of extraordinary contrast. Dazzling wealth displayed on fashionable streets barely a mile from crushing poverty crammed into courts so dark and narrow that sunlight never reaches the ground. It is loud, dangerous, vibrant, filthy, innovative, and alive in a way that no other place in the world quite matches. But first, you need to get out of bed. If you are poor, and the majority of Londoners are, in ways that dwarf modern definitions of poverty, getting out of bed means untangling yourself from the bodies of the 3 or 4 other people you have been sleeping alongside. Not family members necessarily, though they might be. The street below is alive with a noise you would find overwhelming even before breakfast. The rhythmic clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, the protesting squeal of iron wheel rims grinding over uneven paving, the hollow drumbeat of horse hooves, and cutting through all of it, the human voices. Street vendors calling their wares in voices trained to carry over the din of 600,000 other people. Milk below, fresh milk, hot cross buns, buy my chairs to mend, knives to grind. Old rags, any old rags. Each trade had its own cry, its own particular cadence, and together they formed a kind of rough urban symphony that played from before dawn until long after dark. London in 1720 is by almost any measure the most extraordinary city on earth. It is home to somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000 people, a number so large it strains the imagination of anyone living anywhere else in Britain, where most towns count their residents in the hundreds rather than the hundreds of thousands. Nearly 1 in 10 people in England lives here. The city sprawls across the north bank of the Thames in a great, irregular mass of streets and lanes and courts and alleys, spilling across the river over the single ancient stone bridge that has connected the two halves of the city for centuries. It is a place of extraordinary contrast. Dazzling wealth displayed on fashionable streets barely a mile from crushing poverty crammed into courts so dark and narrow that sunlight never reaches the ground. It is loud, dangerous, vibrant, filthy, innovative, and alive in a way that no other place in the world quite matches. But first, you need to get out of bed. If you are poor, and the majority of Londoners are, in ways that dwarf modern definitions of poverty, getting out of bed means untangling yourself from the bodies of the 3 or 4 other people you have been sleeping alongside. Not family members necessarily, though they might be. It might be fellow lodgers, strangers, who have paid the same landlord the same few pennies for the same fraction of the same mattress. Beds in London's crowded tenements are shared commodities, rented by the shift the way a modern hotel rents rooms by the hour. The mattress you are lying on is a bag of horsehair or straw that has been compressed by years of bodies into a hard, lumpy landscape. The blanket is thin wool, slightly damp, and inhabited by the kind of livestock that requires no feeding, because it has been feeding on you all night. Your room, and if you are lucky it is a room, though it might be half a room divided by a thin board partition, measures perhaps 12 feet by 10 feet. Into this space are crammed the basic necessaries of existence. The bed you share, a rough wooden chair or stool, possibly a small table, a cooking pot if you have one, and whatever personal possessions can be stored in a bundle in the corner. There is no wardrobe because you do not have enough clothes to fill one. What you wore yesterday, you will wear today. What you are wearing today, you will probably wear for the rest of the week. The building itself was thrown up in a hurry. London has been growing so fast for so long that its housing stock is in a constant state of breathless, inadequate expansion. After the Great Fire of 1666 scorched a significant portion of the old medieval city, there was a brief moment of possibility, a chance to rebuild something more organized and livable. That moment largely passed. What grew up in its place was not a planned city, but a dense, haphazard accumulation of houses, built wherever space could be found, subdivided whenever rent could be extracted, and maintained only enough to prevent them from falling down entirely. Courts built upon courts, business premises converted into tenements, hovels and shacks filling every gap between more substantial buildings. He City has become, as one contemporary observer put it, a honeycomb of dwellings, cells packed so tightly together that moving between them means navigating a labyrinth of unlit passages that barely deserve the name of alleyways. Your building leans, they all do, a little. The upper floors extend over the street in a style inherited from the medieval city. The overhang brings in a bit more floor space on the upper floors, while gradually closing off the sky below, until, in the narrowest streets, the buildings almost meet overhead, and the strip of sky visible between them is barely wider than a handspan. In summer, this creates a kind of oppressive, airless tunnel. In winter, it channels the rain and the wind into a concentrated stream of misery, directed exactly at whoever is unfortunate enough to be walking through it at the time. This is your home. And for the majority of Londoners in the early decades of the 1700s, it is simply the way things are. But London is not one city. It is two, at least, and possibly more. While you have been waking up in your single-room tenement in the crowded streets of Southwark or Aldgate or Shoreditch, someone else has been waking up 3 miles to the west in circumstances so completely different that the two lives might as well be happening in different countries. Imagine waking up in Grosvenor Square, which was begun in 1720, on the western edge of the city's fashionable expansion. You were in a house of 4 or 5 stories, a townhouse, purpose-built, with a symmetrical Georgian facade of red brick and white stone, tall windows aligned in careful rows, and a front door set into a pedimented frame that announces the wealth and taste of the family within. Your bedroom has a ceiling high enough to stand under without stooping, which sounds obvious, but in much of London is genuinely not guaranteed. The floor is polished wood, covered with a turkey carpet that costs more than most Londoners earn in a year. The walls are hung with paper or fabric in fashionable patterns. The fireplace, and there is a fireplace, lit each morning by a servant before you wake, is surrounded by carved marble. On the mantelpiece, a clock ticks quietly. A dressing table holds an assortment of silver-topped bottles and boxes. The bed you slept in last night was large enough for 4 people and occupied by only 1. When you ring the bell beside the bed, a servant appears within minutes. He or she has already been awake for hours. The household's domestic staff typically rise at 5 or 5:30 to light fires, heat water, black the grates, dust the public rooms, and polish the brass before the family begins to stir. The domestic servant is one of the great constants of Georgian London life. In the wealthier households, there are dozens of them. A butler, a housekeeper, a cook, footmen, ladies' maids, kitchen maids, scullery maids, a coachman, grooms, a gardener. Even moderately prosperous families keep 2 or 3 servants as a basic sign of respectability. For the legions of young men and women who pour into London from the countryside every year seeking employment, domestic service is often the first and sometimes the only opportunity available. A girl from a Gloucestershire village might walk into London at 16 years old with nothing but the clothes on her back and the address of a house that might need a kitchen maid. If she is lucky, she will find a position. If she is very lucky, that position will be with a household that treats its servants with something approaching decency. The morning routine in a wealthy household is an elaborate, almost theatrical production. The man of the house requires hot water brought to his dressing room, where his valet assists him through the complex process of dressing. Fashionable men in the first decades of the century wear suits of heavy silk or fine wool in rich colors, deep burgundy, forest green, sapphire blue, with elaborate embroidery on the coat, waistcoat, and cuffs. The breeches buckle just below the knee, where white silk stockings take over, disappearing into shoes with square buckles of silver or polished steel. The shirt, made of fine linen, has ruffled cuffs that emerge from the coat sleeves to be shown off. The neck is wrapped in a cravat of white linen, arranged with meticulous care by the valet. And then there is the wig. The powdered wig is one of the defining symbols of the age, and in the first half of the 18th century, it is nearly universal among men of any pretension to social standing. It sits on a shaved or close-cropped head, the natural hair having been removed to make the wig fit more smoothly, and it transforms the wearer's appearance entirely. Made of human hair, horsehair, or in cheaper versions, goat hair or even baked wool, the wig is built up over a wired frame into an imposing structure that adds 6 inches or more to the wearer's apparent height. It is then dusted with powder, wheat starch or plaster of Paris. That gives it its characteristic chalky whiteness. In great households, the powdering ceremony is a production in its own right, with the subject seated in the center of the room, while servants puff clouds of white powder from bellows, and everyone else retreats to avoid breathing in the cloud. The wig is expensive. A good one costs several pounds, a week's wages for many working Londoners. It requires regular maintenance, cleaning, and restyling. It is hot in summer, heavy at all times, and prone to slipping at inconvenient moments. It is also infested, or rather it was infested before its owner had it cleaned, with the same lice that are a nearly universal feature of Georgian life across all social classes. And yet men wear them because status demands it. The wig says, "I am a person of consequence. I have money and time. I inhabit a world above the one where you have to grow your own hair." The working day for most of these tradespeople runs from roughly 6 in the morning to 8 or 9 at night, 12 to 15 hours, with breaks for meals that might be eaten at the workbench or in the street. Apprentices, who form the junior labor force in many trades, work these hours from the age of 10 or 12, living in their master's house and receiving board and lodging in lieu of wages. The apprenticeship system is one of the defining social institutions of Georgian London. The mechanism by which a boy from the countryside might spend 7 years learning a trade and emerge, if all goes well, with enough skill to set up on his own. It is also, depending on the master, a mechanism for exploitation that would make the blood run cold. Boys are beaten, starved, overworked, and in some trades exposed to materials, lead, mercury, arsenic in the dye trades, that will quietly damage their health for the rest of their lives. Now let us talk about the streets themselves, because the streets of 1700s London are their own complete world. A world that operates by rules you have to learn quickly or pay dearly for. The first thing you notice, stepping out of any doorway in the city, is that the street is not a road in any sense you might recognize. It is a shared space used simultaneously by pedestrians, horses, carts, coaches, livestock being driven to market, dogs, pigs in some neighborhoods, and a seemingly endless variety of people conducting every aspect of their lives in public because their homes do not have enough room. The street surface itself is cobblestone in better maintained areas, but in much of the city, it is packed earth, gravel, or simply whatever happens to be underfoot after years of traffic have mixed the original surface with the accumulated detritus of urban life. After rain, it is mud of a particularly rich and complex composition, rainwater, horse manure, and London in the 1700s is home to tens of thousands of horses, each producing roughly 35 pounds of dung per day. The contents of chamber pots thrown from upper windows, the offal from nearby butcher stalls, rotting vegetable matter, ash from the thousands of coal fires, and God knows what else. Walking through London on a wet day is a navigational challenge that requires constant attention to your footing, and a philosophical acceptance that your shoes are probably beyond saving. And the smell. We have mentioned the smell, but it is worth returning to it, because it is so central to the experience of living in this city that contemporary writers return to it again and again. London in the early 1700s has no centralized sewage system. There is a network of underground drains, but these were designed to carry rainwater, not human waste, and they are chronically overwhelmed by what actually flows through them. The open sewers that run along the center of many streets carry a mixture of rainwater and everything else, emptying eventually into the Thames or into one of the city's smaller rivers, the Fleet, the Walbrook, most of which have by now been built over and converted into open sewers themselves. The Thames itself is where the city's drinking water also comes from, drawn up by water wheels at London Bridge and distributed through a network of wooden pipes to the city's wealthier areas. The connection between the water you drink and the water you empty your chamber pot into has not yet been grasped in any systematic way, and it will not be until the great cholera outbreaks of the next century. For now, the city simply lives with its own filth, breathing it, walking through it, drinking it. Visitors to London in this period consistently note the smell. Letters sent home from the city arrive with a faintly sooty odor embedded in the paper. Foreign dignitaries complain in their memoirs about the air. Londoners themselves, who have been breathing it all their lives, are mostly inured to it, though even they sometimes write with a kind of weary acknowledgement that the city is, in this respect, something less than ideal. But the streets are not just unpleasant. They are dangerous in ways that go beyond the simple physical hazard of slippery cobblestones. London in the early decades of the 1700s has no organized police force. The concept of a professional, uniformed, salaried police service does not exist in England. The Metropolitan Police will not be established until 1829. In the meantime, law enforcement in London is the responsibility of unpaid parish constables, ordinary citizens performing a civic duty they have been obligated into, usually reluctantly, supplemented by watchmen hired by neighborhoods to patrol the streets at night. The watchmen, known affectionately and sometimes disparagingly as Charlies, are not renowned for their effectiveness. They are often elderly men, selected more for their availability and willingness to work for very little money than for any particular physical prowess or determination. Their primary weapon is a lantern, a rattle for raising the alarm, and a staff. They patrol specified beats, calling the hours into the darkness, and they are singularly ill-equipped to deal with organized criminal enterprises or determined violent offenders. Into this vacuum of law enforcement, crime has expanded to fill every available space. London in the 1700s is home to a criminal underworld of impressive sophistication and extraordinary variety. Pickpockets work the crowds at markets, executions, and anywhere else that large numbers of people gather. And they work, in many cases, in organized teams, with one person creating a distraction while another lifts your pocket watch or cuts the strings of your purse. Highwaymen on horseback rob travelers on the roads leading into and out of the city, operating with a theatrical bravado that makes them popular figures in the ballads and broadsheets sold on every street corner. Housebreakers, known as cracksmen, work methodically through neighborhoods, their knowledge of which houses have valuables and which have been left unattended coming from an intelligence network of servants, street traders, and informants. The Grub Street Press, the cheap, popular publishing industry centered on the street of that name near Moorfields, feeds a voracious public appetite for crime news, producing pamphlets detailing the exploits of notorious criminals, their trials, their speeches from the scaffold, and their alleged last words. The highwayman Dick Turpin, whose actual career was far more sordid and violent than his legend would suggest, becomes a romantic hero in these publications. Jack Shepherd, a carpenter's apprentice turned thief and jailbreaker, draws crowds of 200,000 people to his hanging at Tyburn in 1724, a number that represents nearly a third of the city's entire population, and speaks to the extraordinary fascination that crime and punishment hold for Georgian Londoners. Which brings us to the gallows. If you have any interest at all in the spectacle of public punishment, London in the 1700s is, in a deeply disturbing sense, a good place to be. Public execution here is not a rare event or a solemn ceremony. It is one of the city's great recurring entertainments, drawing crowds that rival any theatrical performance, any royal procession, any market day. The primary venue is Tyburn, now roughly the location of Marble Arch at the northeastern corner of Hyde Park, where the permanent three-legged gallows known as the Tyburn tree has stood since the 16th century. The procedure is always the same. On execution day, typically Monday, so that the chaplain can spend Sunday evening preparing the condemned. The prisoners are loaded onto a cart at Newgate Prison and transported the 2-mile route to Tyburn through streets lined with tens of thousands of onlookers. The journey takes hours because it winds through the city and because the tradition permits, even encourages, the condemned to stop at taverns along the way and drink a final pint. They are allowed to make speeches. They are encouraged to be theatrical. The crowd wants a performance, and the condemned frequently oblige. At Tyburn, the cart is driven under the crossbeam of the gallows. The noose is placed around the neck. The cart is driven away. There is no drop, no sudden death. The hanging rope is too short for that, and the condemned person is suspended in the air, strangling slowly, while the crowd watches and shouts. Friends and family sometimes rush forward and pull on the legs to speed death. The body hangs for an hour before being cut down. What happens to it next depends on the nature of the crime and the instructions of the courts. This is public execution in the 1700s, and it happens regularly. In the peak years between 1780 and 1785, the courts at the Old Bailey hand down more than 750 death sentences per year. Not all of these are carried out. The king can grant pardons. Juries sometimes deliberately undervalue stolen goods to bring them below the capital threshold. And transportation to the colonies is increasingly used as an alternative. But enough of them are to maintain a steady rhythm of public hangings that are woven into the fabric of London life. The reason so many sentences are handed down is a phenomenon known as the Bloody Code, which is the informal name given to the body of criminal law that governs England in this period. In 1689, there are around 50 capital offenses in English law, crimes for which the penalty is death. By 1776, there are close to 200. By 1815, the number will reach 225. The Bloody Code makes death the potential penalty for crimes that would attract a fine or a short prison sentence today. Stealing goods worth more than 12 pence, 1/20th of a skilled worker's weekly wage, roughly equivalent to 30 pounds in modern terms. From a shop, stealing from a shipwreck, damaging Westminster Bridge, cutting down a young tree in an orchard, being an unmarried mother who conceals the death of her infant, impersonating a Chelsea pensioner. The list is extensive, and it reflects a legal philosophy that places the protection of property above almost everything else, and that assumes the threat of death will deter crime in ways that lesser penalties cannot. In practice, the system produces results that even contemporaries find troubling. Juries regularly acquit obviously guilty defendants, rather than condemn them to death for offenses that do not seem to merit it. Judges hand down death sentences and immediately petition the king for pardons. The spectacle of public hangings does not obviously reduce crime, and may, some observers suggest, have the opposite effect, providing the kind of crowds in which pickpockets thrive, and perhaps normalizing violence in the minds of those who watch it regularly. There is another institution that looms large in the lives of London's poor, the debtor's prison. You cannot pay your bills. You cannot pay your rent. You owe a few shillings to a tradesman who has decided to take legal action. If the debt is judged valid and you cannot pay, you go to prison. And in prison, you must pay for your own food and lodging, because the prison makes no provision for its inmates beyond the cell itself. This arrangement produces an obvious paradox. You were imprisoned because you had no money. In prison, you need money to survive. You therefore emerge from prison in more debt than you entered it, having borrowed from other inmates, from criminal moneylenders who operate through the prison walls, or from the jailers themselves. Newgate Prison, the main London jail, is a building of extraordinary misery. Dark, airless, overcrowded, and stinking, where felons awaiting trial are mixed with debtors, where disease moves through the population with terrifying speed, and where the principal currency is information, violence, and the ability to pay. Now let us speak about disease. Because disease in 1700s London is not a background hum of risk, but a constant, immediate, daily presence that shapes every aspect of life. The single most lethal disease in 18th century Britain is smallpox. In the cities of mid-century Europe, smallpox accounts for between 10 and 20% of all burials. It kills 1 in 3 of the people it infects, and it leaves survivors badly disfigured, pockmarks covering the face, hands, and body, and sometimes blind. London's records show more than 320,000 deaths from smallpox since 1664. In the first decades of a century, infant mortality in the poorest London parishes runs at over 350 deaths per 1,000 births, which is to say, more than 1 in 3 children born in the poorest parts of the city will be dead before their second birthday. The causes are entangled: smallpox, typhus carried by lice, dysentery spread through contaminated water, respiratory infections in damp, overcrowded, poorly ventilated rooms, and simple malnutrition in a city where the cheapest food is often also the least nutritious. If you are rich enough, you might by the 1720s consider inoculation against smallpox, the practice of deliberately infecting a person with material from a mild smallpox pustule, in the hope of inducing a milder version of the disease that will provide immunity to future attacks, has been brought to London from the Ottoman Empire by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who saw it practiced in Constantinople and had her own children inoculated. It is controversial. The church has objections. The medical establishment has reservations. The public has fears. And it requires a certain degree of courage and faith in a procedure that occasionally kills its recipients. But it works, often enough that wealthy families adopt it, and gradually the practice spreads and reduces the burden of smallpox among those who can access and afford it. The poor cannot. Medical care for the poor in 1700s. London ranges from non-existent to actively harmful. The city has hospitals. St. Bartholomew's and St. Thomas's have been operating since the medieval period, and new ones are established during this century, including Guy's Hospital in 1721, which is founded by Thomas Guy with the fortune he made speculating in South Sea Company stock at exactly the right moment. But hospital care in this period is not what the word implies today. Surgery is performed without anesthesia, on conscious patients who are held down by attendants. The understanding of infection and how it spreads does not yet exist, so surgical instruments are not sterilized between uses. Surgical wounds are not kept clean, and a significant proportion of patients who survive their initial operation die of the subsequent infection. The treatments available for most diseases are bleeding, using lancets or leeches to remove blood, on the theory that most diseases are caused by an excess of one of the four humors, purging with laxatives, and various herbal preparations whose effectiveness ranges from modest to illusory. The Thames is the city's principal source of drinking water, and the Thames in 1720 is not a clean river. Everything goes into it. The contents of the drains, the waste from the tanneries and dye works and breweries along its banks, the ballast dumped by incoming ships, the bodies of animals and sometimes people, the water wheels at London Bridge, and a few other points pump this water into wooden pipes that run under the streets to customers who can afford the connection fee. The water is not filtered or treated in any way before distribution, and the pipes themselves, old, leaky wooden conduits, are as likely to pick up contamination from the ground they run through as to deliver anything that could reasonably be described as clean water. The connection between contaminated water and waterborne disease will not be demonstrated scientifically until John Snow maps the Broad Street cholera outbreak in 1854. But by then, London will have been drinking bad water for centuries. The result of all this is a city where the average life expectancy is significantly below what it would be in the surrounding countryside. A calculation from the 1840s suggests that the average life expectancy in Surrey, south of London, is around 45 years. In Liverpool, it is 26. London falls somewhere in between, with a mean closer to 37. But these averages are dragged down enormously by child mortality and disguise a wide range of actual experience. A wealthy Londoner in a clean house in Mayfair, eating adequate food, with access to decent medical care, might reasonably expect to live into their 60s, or even 70s. A laborer in Shoreditch or Bermondsey, drinking contaminated water, sleeping in a damp room with 6 other people, working a physically destroying job, and unable to afford medical attention when illness strikes, is living a significantly shorter story. This is the world of daily labor, disease, and precarious survival that the majority of Londoners inhabit. But London is also, always and simultaneously, a city of extraordinary pleasure, spectacle, and entertainment. And this is where, if you can afford it and survive long enough to enjoy it, London in the 1700s becomes genuinely magnificent. The coffee house is one of the great inventions of Georgian London, and it is impossible to overstate how central it becomes to the city's intellectual and commercial life. The first coffee house in London opened on St. Michael's Alley in Cornhill in 1652. Established by Pasqua Rosé, a Greek servant who had learned the coffee trade in the Levant. Within 3 decades, there are close to 2,000 coffee houses in the city. By 1739, more than 500 remain. Each one is a combination of newspaper room, gentleman's club, office debating society, and stock exchange. For the price of a penny, the cost of a dish of coffee, any man can enter, sit at a table, read the news sheets laid out for customers, and participate in the conversations happening around him. The conversations that happen in coffee houses are not trivial. Lloyd's Coffee House in Tower Street becomes the meeting place of ship captains, merchants, and insurers interested in maritime trade, and gives its name to the insurance market that will eventually become Lloyd's of London. Jonathan's Coffee House in Exchange Alley in 1698 becomes the meeting place of stockbrokers, and eventually develops into the London Stock Exchange. Will's Coffee House in Covent Garden is where the poet and playwright John Dryden holds court, where Alexander Pope comes as a young man to listen and learn, and where the literary fashions of the age are made and unmade over dishes of coffee and conversation. The great thinkers and writers of the age, Samuel Johnson, Jonathan Swift, Joseph Addison, Richard Steele, are coffee house regulars. The coffee house is where news travels, where business is done, where ideas are tested and challenged, and where the social life of fashionable and intellectual London plays out in a relatively democratic setting. The Penny University, it is sometimes called. You do not need a degree or a title to enter. You need only the price of a coffee and a willingness to engage. The coffee house excludes women, almost without exception. This is one of the consistent cruelties of Georgian social life. The public intellectual and commercial sphere is almost entirely male, leaving women to conduct their social and intellectual lives in the private domestic sphere, through letter writing, through the drawing rooms of houses where they are hostesses rather than guests, through the limited number of public venues, the pleasure gardens, the theater, the assembly rooms, where mixed company is acceptable. The theater is one of the great meeting places of Georgian London society, and it draws audiences from every class and background, if not to quite the same parts of the theater. The London stage in the 1700s is experiencing something of a golden age, with the Theatre Royal at Drury Lane and the rival theatre at Covent Garden presenting the works of playwrights, including William Congreve, John Vanbrugh, and later in the century Richard Brinsley Sheridan and Oliver Goldsmith. A night at the theatre in 1720 is an experience quite different from its modern equivalent. The Pit, the ground floor area in front of the stage, is standing room, crowded, noisy, and occupied by a mix of apprentices, tradespeople, and men about town who talk throughout the performance and do not particularly feel they should stop. The galleries above are even noisier. The boxes to the sides of the stage are where the fashionable world comes to be seen as much as to see, conducting their social business through the performance rather than despite it. The actors perform in front of candles, wearing their own clothes or theatrical versions of contemporary fashion rather than historical costumes, which gives the ancient classics a distinctly 18th century flavor. If the audience dislikes what it sees, it says so loudly, sometimes throwing things. Beyond the theater, the city's entertainment landscape includes everything from the pleasure gardens at Vauxhall and Ranelagh, where for a modest admission fee, you can walk tree-lined promenades, listen to live music, eat supper in a box, and observe or participate in the elaborate social performance of fashionable London, to the bear baiting rings in Southwark, where chained bears are set upon by dogs while spectators bet on the outcome, to the cockpits, where trained roosters fight to the death, to the boxing matches, where bare-knuckle fighters draw enthusiastic crowds. The same city that produces the Royal Academy of Arts in 1768 and supports the careers of Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough also fills arenas to watch men beat each other unconscious. Gambling runs through all of it, at every level of society. In the great houses of the West End, card games for stakes that would ruin a working family are a nightly occurrence. In the coffee houses and taverns, dice and cards are played for smaller amounts that are nonetheless ruinous for those who cannot afford to lose. At every level of Georgian society, the gamble is a fundamental form of entertainment and a fundamental source of ruin. Now, let us talk about gin, because gin is one of the defining facts of London life in the first half of the 18th century. And what happened with gin in those decades is one of the most extraordinary episodes of social catastrophe in the city's history. The story begins in 1690, when the English government, in the context of a war with France and a desire to reduce dependence on French brandy, breaks the monopoly of the London Guild of Distillers and permits anyone to distill spirits from domestic grain without a license. This is intended as a way to support English grain farmers and deprive France of export revenue. What it actually creates is a deluge of cheap, powerful, often dangerously adulterated spirits flooding into the city at a price that even the very poor can afford. By 1730, 10 million gallons of gin are being distilled in London annually, and sold from 7,000 dram shops across the city. By 1743, that figure has risen to more than 18 million gallons consumed across England, the vast majority of it in London. In the worst years, 1 in 8 London houses sells gin over the counter. It is available from coffee houses, chandler's shops, grocers, pawnbrokers, tobacconists, barbershops, and street vendors. It is sold everywhere. The gin consumed by London's poor in the 1720s and 1730s bears little resemblance to the refined, botanically infused spirit of today. It is made cheaply and quickly from poor quality grain, often flavored with turpentine or sulfuric acid to approximate the juniper taste of proper gin. And it is roughly twice as strong as modern distilled spirits. It is consumed neat, in quantities that would be remarkable even to seasoned drinkers. The appeal is not hard to understand. It is cheap. A penny buys enough to induce intoxication. It is warming. It provides a brief but powerful escape from circumstances that are, for many Londoners, unremittingly bleak. And it is, in the language of gin's most notorious advertisement, available for a penny. The famous sign, drunk for 1 day, dead drunk for 2 days, clean straw for nothing. May be apocryphal and may be real. Either way, it captures something true about the relationship between gin and poverty in this period. The gin sellers give their products names that tell their own story. Lady's Delight, Cuckold's Comfort, Strip Me Naked, Kill Grief, Knock Me Down, Mother's Ruin. That last name is telling, because one of the most disturbing features of the gin craze is its effect on London's women and children. Contemporary observers and pamphlet writers describe women nursing infants while incapacitated by gin, children being given gin to keep them quiet, mothers neglecting and sometimes destroying their children in states of intoxication. These accounts are sometimes exaggerated for rhetorical effect. The pamphleteers and reformers who write about the gin craze have an agenda, but they are not entirely invented. The parliamentary hearings on gin in the 1730s and 1740s produce witness testimony that is deeply disturbing. In 1734, a woman named Judith Dufour retrieved her 2-year-old child from the workhouse, stripped the clothes from its body, strangled it, and sold the clothes for 1 shilling and 4 pence to buy gin. This case is not invented. It appears in the court records, and it becomes one of the galvanizing pieces of evidence used by reformers pushing for gin regulation. Hogarth's famous print, Gin Lane, published in 1751, depicts a woman so lost in intoxication that she drops her infant from a staircase. A visualization of the Judith Dufour case and dozens of others like it. In the same image, a man who has pawned everything he owns for gin hangs himself from a rafter. A child gnaws on a bone among corpses, and buildings crumble while gin shops remain open and busy. The social damage is measurable. Death rates in the worst gin-drinking parishes of London rise during the peak years of the craze. Birth rates fall, as women whose health is destroyed by gin bear fewer live children. Crime rates rise. The workhouses fill with children abandoned by parents who cannot or will not care for them. Contemporary estimates suggest that London is producing perhaps 1,000 abandoned or orphaned children per year by the late 16s, and the figure grows through the first decades of the 1700s. Parliament passes Gin Acts in 1729, 1736, 1743, and 1747, with varying degrees of effectiveness. The 1736 Act is the most ambitious, imposing a £50 annual license fee that is designed to make most gin shops unviable. But it fails almost completely, because the fee is so high that only 2 licenses are taken out in the whole of London, while bootleggers and unlicensed sellers simply continue trading. The gin is sold under new names to evade the law, traded from back rooms and private homes, distributed through networks of sellers that are almost impossible to monitor. It is not until the 1751 Act, which takes a more practical approach, requiring distillers to sell only to licensed retailers and imposing requirements that make the trade harder to conduct informally, combined with rising grain prices that make cheap gin more expensive to produce, that the craze begins to subside. By 1757, it is effectively over, the combined effect of regulation and economics having done what moral outrage alone could not achieve. The gin craze is not just an interesting historical episode. It is a window into something fundamental about London in this period, the way in which poverty, despair, lack of any social safety net, and the availability of cheap intoxicants can combine to produce a public health crisis of devastating proportions. It is also worth noting that the same society that was appalled by the behavior of gin-drinking poor Londoners was simultaneously happy to profit from the trade in gin, had no concept of addiction as a disease rather than a moral failing, and offered no alternative to poverty beyond the workhouse and the grudging charity of parish relief. The contrast between the world of the gin shop and the world of the coffee house reflects the fundamental fracture at the heart of Georgian London, a city of extraordinary energy and sophistication that is simultaneously a city of appalling inequality and suffering. The West End and the East End of London in this period are not just different neighborhoods. They are different planets, separated by a few miles of streets, but divided by a gulf of wealth, expectation, and daily experience that might as well be an ocean. Walk west from the City of London, the old walled medieval city, the square mile of commerce and finance, and you enter a world of planned elegance that is being built almost from scratch in these decades. Mayfair is the most fashionable address in Europe. Its squares and streets laid out in a geometry of wealth and propriety that reflects the confidence of an aristocracy that feels itself at the apex of civilization. Grosvenor Square, begun in 1720, contains some of the largest and most expensive houses in London, their brick facades suggesting a studied modesty that conceals interiors of spectacular opulence. The families who live here arrive each year for the London season in autumn, filling the square and its surrounding streets with the noise of their carriages and the business of their social lives. The balls and assemblies and dinner parties and parliamentary sessions that constitute the world they have built for themselves. Their houses are served by an army of servants who live in the basement and attic floors, rarely visible to the family above stairs, except when they are needed. The footmen wear livery, a formal uniform in the household's colors, and stand behind chairs at dinner. The ladies' maids dress their mistresses in the complex layered architecture of Georgian women's fashion. The chemise of white linen next to the skin, the stays of whalebone or cane that sculpt the torso into the fashionable silhouette, the hooped petticoat that holds the skirts out in the bell shape that is the visual signature of the first half of the century, and over it all the silk or brocade gown in colors that in some households change with each season's fashions, and in others are passed down through generations because silk, even old silk, is too valuable to waste. The food at the tables of the West End is another world entirely from what is being eaten a few miles away. A fashionable dinner in Mayfair in 1720 proceeds through multiple courses, each course consisting of multiple dishes arranged on the table simultaneously in a profusion that represents the host's wealth and generosity. Roasted meats, beef, veal, lamb, pork, game birds, sit alongside fish in elaborate sauces, alongside made dishes of various kinds, things prepared in the kitchen rather than simply cooked, alongside pies, tarts, jellies, and the sweet things that conclude the meal. The wine flows from France. Claret from Bordeaux is fashionable, poured from Portugal increasingly so. And the table itself, covered with white damask and set with silver and porcelain, is an object of considerable beauty in its own right. Walk east from the city instead, and the world changes within a few streets. The East End of London, Stepney, Radcliffe, Limehouse, Wapping, Spitalfields, Whitechapel, is built around the port, and it feels it. The streets are denser, darker, louder, more chaotic. The houses are smaller, older, more crowded, more damaged. The people are harder worked, poorer fed, and less likely to survive childhood. The air smells different. More of the river, more of coal, more of the particular effluvia of tanning yards and rope walks, and the dozens of trades that require space, water access, and a tolerance for stench. Foreign communities cluster here. Huguenot refugees from France who have been coming since the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, and who have established themselves as weavers in Spitalfields, producing the silk textiles that will eventually clothe the fashionable women of the West End. Jewish families who cannot join the guilds or live in certain parts of the city, and who have established their communities around Aldgate and Duke's Place. Irish laborers who have come seeking work and found it in the docks and the building trades. A fashionable dinner in Mayfair in 1720 proceeds through multiple courses, each course consisting of multiple dishes arranged on the table simultaneously in a profusion that represents the host's wealth and generosity. Roasted meats, beef, veal, lamb, pork, game birds, sit alongside fish in elaborate sauces, alongside made dishes of various kinds, things prepared in the kitchen rather than simply cooked, alongside pies, tarts, jellies, and the sweet things that conclude the meal. The wine flows from France. Claret from Bordeaux is fashionable, poured from Portugal increasingly so. And the table itself, covered with white damask and set with silver and porcelain, is an object of considerable beauty in its own right. Walk east from the city instead, and the world changes within a few streets. The East End of London, Stepney, Radcliffe, Limehouse, Wapping, Spitalfields, Whitechapel, is built around the port, and it feels it. The streets are denser, darker, louder, more chaotic. The houses are smaller, older, more crowded, more damaged. The people are harder worked, poorer fed, and less likely to survive childhood. The air smells different. More of the river, more of coal, more of the particular effluvia of tanning yards and rope walks, and the dozens of trades that require space, water access, and a tolerance for stench. Foreign communities cluster here. Huguenot refugees from France who have been coming since the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, and who have established themselves as weavers in Spitalfields, producing the silk textiles that will eventually clothe the fashionable women of the West End. Jewish families who cannot join the guilds or live in certain parts of the city, and who have established their communities around Aldgate and Duke's Place. Irish laborers who have come seeking work and found it in the docks and the building trades, along with the particular poverty that goes with being the most recent arrivals in a city that does not welcome newcomers with any particular warmth. Spitalfields is a neighborhood that tells both stories at once. At its best, in the first decades of the century, it contains substantial houses built by prosperous master weavers, their facades decorated with the kind of ornamental brickwork that speaks of solid middle-class prosperity. Bands of weavers' windows, wide, shallow windows designed to let as much light as possible into the upper-floor workshops where the looms work, stare out over the street. The silk they produce here is some of the finest in Europe, but the weaving trade is volatile, subject to fashion and to competition from imported silks. And when it goes wrong, it goes badly. The journeyman weavers who work in the attics of the master weavers' houses, paid by the yard, dependent on a trade that can contract sharply when French silks flood the market, or when fashion turns against the heavy brocades that are Spitalfields' specialty. These men and women exist on the edge of subsistence in the good years and fall below it in the bad ones. Night in London deserves its own account, because night in London, in the early decades of the 1700s, is a genuinely different country from the day. Until the introduction of oil lamps in the 1750s, London after dark is lit only by whatever light residents and businesses choose to put out. A requirement that householders hang a lantern outside their door on specified evenings exists, but its enforcement is patchy at best. The result is a city that descends, on dark nights, into something close to genuine darkness, broken only by the occasional carried lantern, the flicker of candlelight from a window, or the glow of a tavern's fire. In the absence of adequate street lighting, the already confusing geography of London, with its maze of courts and alleys and passages that provide cover for criminal activity in the daytime, becomes genuinely dangerous after dark. Footpads, who work on foot rather than on horseback, and tend to be more violent and less theatrical than highwaymen, operate in the dark lanes between the city's main streets. Robbery with violence is common. The night watchmen patrolling their beats and calling the hours are the only formal protection against this, and they are often outnumbered and outmatched. This changes gradually over the course of the century. The improvements to street lighting that come with oil lamps from the 1750s onward transform the nighttime city. By 1800, London will have some of the best street lighting in Europe, and foreign visitors will remark on it with wonder. But for the first half of the century, night in London is dark in a way that makes the darkness feel inhabited. What inhabits it includes, alongside the criminals and the watch, the extraordinary variety of nighttime entertainment that flourishes in the city. The taverns never fully close. The gin shops remain open. The pleasure gardens at Vauxhall and from 1742 at Ranelagh in Chelsea operate in the evenings. Their tree-lined walks lit by thousands of colored lamps that transform the experience of walking in them into something almost magical. A deliberate, commercial fantasy world created for people who can afford the entrance fee of £1 or so. In the pleasure gardens, class distinctions are temporarily dissolved, or at least complicated. A well-dressed artisan might walk the same paths as a duke's daughter, hear the same orchestra, eat the same supper in an adjacent box. This promiscuous mixing is part of the appeal, and part of what makes the pleasure gardens both popular and slightly transgressive. Assignations are made under the trees. Prostitutes work the walks. The darkness between the lamplit paths provides cover for whatever the fashionable world needs cover for. The Thames at night is its own world. The river is a working highway as much as a picturesque backdrop. And at night, it is lit by the lanterns of hundreds of watermen, the boatmen who ply passengers and goods up and down and across the river, and by the navigation lights of the ships moored in the Pool of London. The smell of the river at low tide, when the mudflats are exposed and their accumulated organic wealth releases into the air, is memorable. Bodies occasionally wash up on the foreshore. The mudlarks, children and desperate adults who scavenge the riverbanks at low tide for anything that can be sold. Pieces of coal dropped from barges, bits of iron and rope, the occasional coin, work in near darkness, feeling for objects in the mud with bare feet. Home and family life in this city take many forms, shaped primarily by the accident of which social class you were born into, and by the further accidents of illness, employment, and fortune that determine how you end up. For the poor family in a shared tenement, domestic life is lived largely in the single room that serves simultaneously as bedroom, kitchen, dining room, and workshop if any work can be done at home. Cooking is done over an open fire or in the shared kitchen of the building, if one exists, or not at all if the family relies on street food. And street food in London in the 1700s is a substantial industry, with vendors selling hot pies, boiled meats, baked potatoes, oysters, and a dozen other things to people who lack the cooking facilities or the fuel to prepare food at home. The diet of the London poor is dominated by bread purchased fresh each day if finances permit, or stale and cheap if they do not. Oatmeal porridge, laps, or water gruel is a common breakfast and sometimes a common dinner. Meat is a luxury for most. A working family might have a piece of salt beef or a bit of bacon once or twice a week. Cheese and butter are eaten when affordable. Vegetables are purchased at market. Cabbage, turnips, onions, carrots, and often boiled into a pottage with whatever else can be added. The quality of the food is adequate for survival, sometimes barely that. Children in the poorest households are chronically malnourished, and the effects show in their growth, their health, and their cognitive development. Women in poor London families work constantly. The division of labor by gender that would later become the Victorian ideal, men earning wages, women keeping house, is a luxury that working-class families cannot afford. Women wash for other households, taking in laundry that they boil in great copper pots and hang to dry wherever space exists. They sew and mend and sell their work through intermediaries. They sell food on the streets. They work in shops and workshops. They take in boarders. They do whatever is necessary, as they always have. The notion of a separate domestic sphere is a middle-class fantasy. Children in poor London families begin contributing to the household economy as soon as they are physically capable. By the age of 7 or 8, a child might be sent to work sweeping crossing points for traffic, picking oakum in the workhouse, or in the earliest reaches of what will eventually become the factory system, doing whatever small work small hands can do. Education, of the formal kind, is inaccessible to most poor children. There are charity schools, established by the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge and other religious organizations, that provide some basic instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic, alongside heavy doses of religious and moral education. But these reach only a fraction of London's poor children, and the literacy rates in the poorest parts of the city remain desperately low throughout the century. But it feels the effects. The money that industrial production will eventually generate flows through London's financial houses. The goods produced in the factories of Manchester and Birmingham pass through London's port, and the workers displaced by mechanization will eventually add to the streams of migrants that are already arriving in the city from the impoverished countryside, swelling its population and adding to the pressure on housing, food, and work. There are wonders, too. Extraordinary public achievements that the 1700s bring to London and that its residents are right to be proud of. St. Paul's Cathedral, Christopher Wren's masterpiece, was consecrated in 1708, and its great dome changes the city's skyline in a way that still shapes how Londoners see their city 3 centuries later. The British Museum is founded in 1753, opened to the public in 1759 in Montague House in Bloomsbury, and represents a new kind of public institution, a collection of knowledge open to all who have the curiosity to visit it, a monument to the idea that the accumulation and sharing of learning is a public good. The Royal Academy of Arts is established in 1768, creating an institutional home for British painting and sculpture at the moment when Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough are producing the portraits that will define how we imagine this age. New bridges across the Thames connect the city's halves more effectively. New roads. The New Road, built in 1756 to relieve the congestion at the northern edge of the built-up area, eased the daily movement of goods and people. And through all of it, through the gin and the gallows and the poverty and the pestilence and the extraordinary beauty of the great houses and the coffeehouse conversations and the music at Vauxhall Gardens and the ships, arriving from the ends of the earth, through all of it, London in the 1700s is alive in a way that has no parallel. It is the largest city in the Western world, growing constantly, changing constantly, absorbing people and ideas and goods from every direction, producing wealth and culture and innovation and misery in approximately equal measure. It is a place where the distance between the life of a Mayfair aristocrat and the life of a Southwark dock laborer is shorter in physical terms than the distance between rooms in a large house, but wider in every other sense than almost any comparison can express. If you had lived in this city, your experience of it would have depended almost entirely on the accident of birth that determined which of its many worlds you entered. If you were born rich, London in the 1700s was extraordinary. A city of theaters and coffee houses and pleasure gardens and fashionable shops and intellectual conversation, and the constant, stimulating noise of a great civilization conducting its business around you. If you were born poor, it was something rather different. A city of constant work and constant risk, of cold rooms and bad water, and the ever-present possibility that illness or injury or bad luck would tip you from subsistence into destitution. And if you were born somewhere in the expanding middle, as a craftsman, a tradesman, a lower professional, a prosperous shopkeeper, London offered you something that most places in the world could not: the possibility of advancement, the chance that intelligence and industry and a bit of luck might move you from one world toward the other. It is a city of tremendous injustice and tremendous possibility, existing simultaneously, often in the same street, sometimes in the same building. It is a city that is genuinely making itself up as it goes, where the rules are still being written, where the future is being shaped in coffee houses and drawing rooms and parliamentary debates and scientific societies, and the practical decisions of thousands of ordinary people navigating their daily lives as best they can. Would you want to have lived here? The romantic in us says yes. To have walked those cobbled streets, to have heard the coffeehouse arguments, to have watched London becoming what it was becoming. The honest part of us, the part that has been listening carefully to what daily life actually looked and smelled and felt like, knows that the answer depends almost entirely on which London you would have been born into. For the lucky few, it was magnificent. For the many, it was a very hard way to live. But it was alive. Always, relentlessly, magnificently alive. If this journey through 1700s London has given you a new way of seeing the world that our ancestors built, please consider liking this video and subscribing to History to Unwind. And I'd love to know. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from tonight and whether you'd have wanted to walk those streets. There's something extraordinary about sharing a quiet moment like this with people from every corner of the world. Until next time, sleep well and remember that history is all around you.